Byerly, today we're bringing you part 2 of our carbon credit report from the 2021 Nebraska Ag Expo, which took place at the Lancaster Event Center. Last week we examined just how these carbon credits can potentially benefit ag producers financially while simultaneously potentially improving that land that they steward. This week we'll dive a bit deeper into some of those finer details of carbon credit markets, and Market Journal's Mike Straub has this story.
And healthy soils.
A 10-year contract might feel like a long time. However, in the carbon credit industry, that kind of contract is considered a compromise and does have some perks.
There are agreements that go longer than 10 years, but 10 years is kind of what probably feels most realistic to growers. And 10 years seems like a long time. If I asked a grower to sell their grain or their livestock out for 10 years today, that would be a really uncomfortable conversation because nobody knows what the markets are going to do over that course of time. So we need to have longer term agreements in place with this, because the people that buy these carbon credits to use in their industries and their companies, the value to them comes in storing that carbon over a long term. So a lot of times they want to see carbon stored 30, 50 years and longer. Well, we know that generationally land changes hands and all of this thing. So in agriculture, we're trying to start off with a compromise, and that's at 10 years. What we do in our program is make sure that the contract's written as such so that if prices appreciate over time, the grower has the opportunity to sell their tons at a higher price when those sell points come to them throughout the course of the contract. And we also set that floor so that if the market does have down years, they've got a floor underneath it. So trying to provide some stability and some reassurance to go along with longer term contracts.
That's what we got to pay attention to is, who are we serving where?
After the 10-year contract ends, carbon sequestration is measured in spot check form, and the grower does not have any financial responsibility in longer-term scenarios.
Carbon sequestration after that 10-year contract is really only measured in somewhat of a spot check form. The verifying body that issues these credits will occasionally come back in and want to spot check a place here or there to verify that what they stored over the course of this contract hasn't gone backwards and things like that. But the grower doesn't have a responsibility for that, any financial or incentive responsibility for that in a longer term scenario as well. So the idea, though, of course, is going to be that when we adopt these practices and you're tying them into your operation for 10 years, you're not going to want to go back and start tilling again. You're not going to want to go back and rip out a pasture and turn it into crop ground, those sorts of things in the long term. You've seen the benefits, not just financially, but soil health-wise and things like that to provide that. From the environmental standpoint of things, there's a tremendous potential in all of this to not just be carbon, right? Carbon we call this marketplace in its entirety an ecosystem services marketplace, and we will continue to see more pieces evolve in this, whether that's nitrous oxide or methane. We may have spot water markets that incentivize water utilization out of aquifers, out of surface water and things like that. This marketplace is going to continue to grow and have opportunities for growers, which a little bit is also why it's so important to learn and engage in this marketplace early on. Even though we don't have that history of it yet and maybe the familiarity that we'd all like to see, new things are going to continue to come and leave those that sat on the sidelines behind for those opportunities. So engage early, learn, and face those new opportunities and things as they come as well.
It should be mentioned that the carbon component does not provide enough money alone to pay for the practices. The long-term benefit for your future is the soil health these practices generate.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions or one of the biggest expectations that growers have when they begin to engage in this conversation process is there's enough money in the carbon component of it to pay for the practice change. And today that's just not the case usually for many of these pieces. Cover crops, whether it's the seeding aspect or the actual cost to seed, tend to cost more than the carbon that they're going to generate. It's back to that long-term 10-year, a decade look at what you can do for soil health water storage, nitrogen production, as well as a generational piece that goes along with this. It's a fairly small investment back in your land on an annual basis to continue to grow that asset for your legacy and for your family.
Agronomy tool, the HANA instruments.
The main piece of advice when starting a contract like this is ask individuals what they are doing in this marketplace and understand what it is you're getting into.
Ask the questions. Ask people what they're doing in this marketplace, and don't jump right into the first person that comes to your door on this. Understand what the ask is. There are contracts today that reward greenhouse gas reduction, which is a yearly thing, all the way up to contracts that look at a long-term, 10-year, maybe even more aspect of carbon sequestration. Understand what you're signing up for, understand the terms of that agreement, and what they're asking of you. What happens if you exceed projections, and what happens if you're lower than projections? Know all those ins and outs that you are so familiar with asking in grain contracts, fertilizer contracts, livestock contracts. Learn what those questions are and what's valuable to your operation, and make sure that you're comfortable with those questions and those answers when you engage in this marketplace.
Same thing under this sedan or whatever this is. Some type
If carbon sequestration is a practice you've been thinking about utilizing on your land, making sure you understand the contract, knowing that the soil benefits is the main goal of the operation, and asking questions to experienced individuals should get you started. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.